We often move through our lives on paths of our own making, guided by ambition, routine, and the quiet hum of daily obligation. We believe we are the architects of our own future, laying each brick of our career, our relationships, our identity, with deliberate intent. But sometimes, the universe has a different blueprint. Sometimes, a single, unplanned, seemingly insignificant act of kindness can knock down a wall we didn't even know was there, revealing a doorway to a life we never could have imagined. This is a story about such a moment. It is a story grounded in the realities of our modern world, about the intersection of quiet desperation and unseen opportunity. It is the story of Maya Sharma, a young woman who, on an ordinary Tuesday, gave her seat to an old woman on a crowded city bus, not knowing that this simple gesture was not an interruption of her journey, but the very beginning of her true destiny. Welcome back to CJ Stories, where we bring you emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul. If you're just joining us for the first time, you're welcome to this wonderful big family. We're so glad to have you here. Please make sure to watch till the end, and if today's story moves you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and share this video with your family and loved ones. Now, let's dive into today's story. ACT-1, The Weight of Concrete. Narrator: The city of Crestwood was a sprawling organism of steel, glass, and concrete, its arteries clogged with the ceaseless flow of traffic. For Maya Sharma, the city felt less like a place of opportunity and more like a finely crafted cage. At 26, she was 2 years out of a prestigious architecture program, armed with a degree, a portfolio filled with breathtaking, human-centric designs, and a heart full of ideals. Her reality, however, was a cubicle on the 17th floor of Sterling & Sterling, a corporate architectural firm known for its efficiency, its profitability, and its profound lack of imagination. Her days were a blur of computer-aided design, rendering soul-crushing parking garages and identical suburban office parks. The buildings she helped create were monuments to mediocrity, designed not for the people who would use them, but for the balance sheets of the corporations that commissioned them. She would spend hours adjusting the width of a concrete support pillar by a few millimeters or calculating the most cost-effective placement of HVAC units in a building that had all the aesthetic charm of a shoebox. Each stroke of her digital pen felt like a betrayal of the principles she had so passionately defended in university. She had dreamed of creating spaces that breathed, that fostered community, that integrated nature and humanity. She had written her thesis on the architecture of belonging, arguing that a building's true value was measured in the quality of the human experience it nurtured. Her professors had called her a visionary. Her boss at Sterling & Sterling, a perpetually stressed man named Mr. Henderson, called her specs and compliance. The commute was the bookend to these draining days. An hour and a half each way, a 3-part journey involving a subway, a transfer, and finally, the number 42 bus, which snaked its way through the disparate neighborhoods of Crestwood. The bus was a microcosm of the city itself, a chaotic, jostling, weary collection of humanity, all sharing the same confined space, yet remaining worlds apart in their own bubbles of exhaustion and digital distraction. On this particular Tuesday in late October, the air had a crisp bite that promised an early winter. The sun was already bleeding into the horizon, painting the smoggy sky in hues of orange and bruised purple. Maya managed to snag a window seat on the 42, a small victory in a day filled with compromises. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching the city slide by. Gleaming skyscrapers gave way to brick-faced commercial districts, which in turn faded into the quiet, tree-lined streets of the inner suburbs. She was tired. Not just physically, but with a deep, soul-level weariness. She clutched her worn leather portfolio to her chest. It contained the day's work, blueprints for a regional distribution center, but tucked into a side pocket were her own sketches. On scraps of paper, on the back of receipts, in a small moleskine notebook, she still designed the buildings of her dreams. A public library with a rooftop garden, a community center built from reclaimed materials, a co-op housing project with interwoven green spaces. These sketches were her secret rebellion, a testament to the architect she still hoped to be. The bus lurched to a halt, its brakes hissing in protest. The doors opened, and a fresh wave of commuters surged aboard, filling every last inch of standing room. The air grew thick with the scent of damp wool, coffee, and collective fatigue. Maya barely looked up, lost in her thoughts, tracing the patterns of condensation on the window. A few stops later, through the throng of bodies, she noticed her. An old woman, standing near the front of the bus, her back slightly stooped. She couldn't have been less than 80. Her hair was a cloud of fine, white silk, and she wore a simple, well-made tweed coat that had likely been in fashion decades ago. One hand, dotted with age spots but elegant in its structure, gripped the overhead rail with a tenacity that seemed to cost her a great deal of effort. In the other, she held a simple canvas tote bag. Every time the bus swayed, she wavered, her small frame struggling to maintain its balance against the momentum. Maya watched for a moment, a familiar and uncomfortable debate playing out in her mind. Someone else will get up. I'm exhausted. My bag is heavy. I was here first. The litany of excuses was the default soundtrack of urban survival. She saw other seated passengers, a man in a suit engrossed in his phone, a teenager with headphones clamped over his ears, a woman staring blankly out the opposite window. No one moved. They were all locked in the same unspoken pact of self-preservation. The bus hit a pothole, and the old woman stumbled, a small gasp escaping her lips. She caught herself, but the effort sent a tremor through her arm. And in that moment, something in Maya snapped. It was the sight of the woman's knuckles, white from the strain of holding on. It was the quiet dignity with which she righted herself, her expression not one of complaint, but of weary resignation. It was the sudden, sharp realization that the principles Maya sketched in her notebook, principles of care, of humanity, of creating a better environment for people, were utterly meaningless if she couldn't even practice them in a space as small as a city bus. Her ideals weren't just for blueprints. They had to be lived. "Ma'am," Maya said, her voice a little louder than she intended. She was already on her feet, gathering her portfolio. The old woman turned her head slowly, her eyes finding Maya's. They were a startlingly clear shade of blue, framed by a web of fine lines, and they held a sharp, assessing intelligence. "Here," Maya said, gesturing to the now empty seat. "Please, take my seat." A flicker of surprise, then gratitude, softened the woman's features. "Oh, no, dear. I'm quite all right," she said, her voice soft but with a crisp, educated diction. It was a reflexive protest, the kind born of a generation that avoided being a bother at all costs. "I insist," Maya said with a gentle smile. "I've been sitting all day. Honestly, stretching my legs will feel good." It was a lie, but a kind one. The woman hesitated for another second, then gave a small, grateful nod. With deliberate, careful movements, she navigated the last 2 feet and sank into the seat. The relief on her face was palpable, a subtle loosening of the tension in her shoulders and jaw. "Thank you," she said, looking up at Maya. "That is very kind of you." "It's no problem at all," Maya replied, now wedged between a construction worker and a student with a giant backpack. The old woman settled in, placing her canvas bag on her lap. She looked at Maya, who was now swaying with the rhythm of the bus, her portfolio clutched in one hand, the other gripping the pole. "Are you a student?" the woman asked, her clear eyes glancing at the portfolio. "I was," Maya said over the rumble of the engine. "I'm an architect. Or, I work at an architectural firm, anyway." The woman's eyebrows raised slightly. "An architect? That's a wonderful profession. Building the world we live in." Maya offered a weak smile. "Something like that. Mostly parking garages these days." The woman's gaze was perceptive. She seemed to understand the faint note of disappointment in Maya's voice. "Well," she said wisely, "even a parking garage needs to be built correctly. But I suspect you dream of more than that." Maya felt an unexpected blush creep up her neck. It was as if this stranger had peered directly into the secret chambers of her heart. "I try to," she admitted. They rode in a comfortable silence for the next few stops. Maya's stop was approaching. As the automated voice announced, Elm Street, she began to shift, preparing to disembark. "This is me," she said to the woman. "Have a good evening." "You as well, dear," the woman replied, her blue eyes warm. "And thank you again." "Of course." The bus hissed to a stop. Maya squeezed her way through the crowded aisle, muttering a string of excuse me's. She was so focused on getting off the bus before the doors closed that she didn't notice. In the clumsy shuffle of moving her heavy portfolio to her other hand to press the exit strip, the side clasp had come undone. A thin manila folder, tucked just inside, slid out, falling silently to the grimy floor of the bus. It went unnoticed, lost in the forest of legs and bags. Maya stepped off the bus and into the cool evening air. She took a deep breath, the simple act of kindness having done more to lift her spirits than she would have expected. It was a tiny flicker of light in a long, gray day. She adjusted the strap of her portfolio on her shoulder and began the short walk to her small apartment, the encounter already fading from her mind, becoming just another fleeting moment in the life of the city. Back on the bus, the crowd began to thin at the next stop. The old woman, Eleanor, looked down and saw the folder on the floor, partially wedged under the seat in front of her. Thinking it might belong to the young man who had just sat down, she leaned forward to pick it up. It was a simple manila folder, unmarked on the outside. She opened it, intending to find a name. There was no name. Instead, there were sheets of drawing paper. They weren't blueprints. They were sketches, drawn with a free and confident hand. The first was a design for a small, inner-city park, with winding paths, a bioswale to collect rainwater, and benches nestled into alcoves of native plants. The notes in the margins spoke of sensory engagement and community gathering. The next sheet showed a mixed-use building, with retail on the ground floor and apartments above, but the facade was covered in a vertical garden, and the roof was a shared space with plots for residents to grow their own food. The final sketch was the most breathtaking, a public library that seemed to rise out of the earth like a natural rock formation, its windows angled to capture the morning light, a soaring central atrium designed to feel like a forest canopy. Eleanor Vance, a woman who had spent a lifetime studying and shaping the built environment, sat perfectly still on the rumbling city bus. She recognized the style. She recognized the philosophy. But more than that, she recognized the spark. It was the untamed, brilliant, and deeply compassionate vision of a true architect, a vision she had not seen in a very, very long time. It was a vision she had once believed in, before the world had taught her otherwise. She looked out the window at the receding street corner where the kind young woman had disembarked. The girl had dropped her dreams at her feet. Eleanor carefully closed the folder, placed it inside her own canvas tote bag, and a slow, determined smile spread across her face. The day, it seemed, was not as ordinary as she had thought. Question for Act 1, Maya's small act of kindness was a direct result of a conflict between her personal fatigue and her professional ideals. In our own lives, how often do we allow our daily exhaustion to override our deeper values, and what might change if we chose differently, even in a small way? ACT 2, The Invitation. Eleanor Vance lived in a house that was an extension of herself, elegant, private, and filled with a quiet history. Tucked away on a street of stately, old-growth oak trees in one of Crestwood's oldest neighborhoods, the brownstone was unassuming from the outside. Inside, however, it was a sanctuary of thought. Every wall was lined with books on urban planning, sociology, art history, botany, and poetry. Architectural models, intricate and beautiful, were displayed like sculptures. The air smelled of old paper, lemon oil polish, and brewed tea. For the past 15 years, this house had been Eleanor's world. She was not just any old woman on a bus. She was Eleanor Vance, the once celebrated co-founder of Vance and Albright, a revolutionary architectural firm from the 60s and 70s. They had been pioneers of the new urbanism movement, championing walkable cities, mixed-use zoning, and public spaces designed for people, not cars. Eleanor had been the soul of the firm, the visionary who believed that architecture could be a tool for social justice and community cohesion. Then had come the tragedy. A progressive, large-scale public housing project she had designed, her magnum opus, had been corrupted by city politics, budget cuts, and mismanagement. It had failed spectacularly, becoming a symbol of urban decay rather than renewal. The public failure, coupled with the personal loss of her husband and partner, David Albright, in the same year, had shattered her. She had retreated from the world, dissolving the firm and choosing a life of quiet seclusion, her vast fortune managed by a trusted advisor. She still read, she still thought, but she no longer built. The world, she had concluded, was not ready for her dreams. Her weekly bus trip was a private ritual. She could have a car service, of course, but the bus was her connection to the city she still loved, a way to observe its rhythms without being a part of them. It was on these trips that she saw the soulless expansion of firms like Sterling and Sterling, the endless march of concrete and glass that she had fought so hard against. That evening, sitting in her worn leather armchair, a cup of chamomile tea steaming on the table beside her, she studied Maya Sharma's sketches again under the warm glow of a reading lamp. It was the handwriting in the margins that captivated her most. Notes like, ensure afternoon sun reaches the elder accessible benches, and use porous paving to return rainwater to the aquifer, and the central staircase should be wide enough for two people to pause and talk without blocking traffic. This wasn't just design, it was empathy rendered in graphite. It was the language she had spoken with David decades ago. Here, in these anonymous sketches, was the echo of her own lost purpose. This young woman, toiling away on parking garages, possessed the very spirit that the world of architecture seemed to have forgotten. Giving up her seat was a kind gesture. But dropping this portfolio? Eleanor Vance did not believe in coincidence. She believed in opportunity, and the wisdom to recognize it. Finding Maya Sharma was not difficult for a woman of Eleanor's means. Her financial advisor, a discreet and efficient man named Mr. Abernathy, managed a small private foundation for her. A call to him in the morning with Maya's first name and the name of her firm was all it took. By noon, Mr. Abernathy had a full professional profile on his desk: Maya Sharma, top of her class, recipient of the University Medal for Architectural Promise, currently employed in the Commercial Structures Division at Sterling and Sterling. He also had her address and phone number. "What is your interest in this young woman, if I may ask, Mrs. Vance?" Abernathy inquired, his voice a smooth baritone over the phone. "She has talent, Arthur," Eleanor replied simply. "The kind that is being wasted. I want to have a conversation. Shall I arrange a meeting? Perhaps a lunch at the club?" "No," Eleanor said firmly. "Nothing so formal. This requires a personal touch. Just her contact information will be sufficient, thank you." 2 days later, Maya arrived home to her small apartment, another grueling day behind her. Tucked into her mailbox, between a credit card offer and a flyer for a pizza place, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. The paper was heavy, expensive. There was no return address. Her name and address were written on the front in elegant, cursive handwriting that looked like it belonged to another century. Curious, she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of matching stationery. The note was brief. "Miss Sharma, I believe you may have dropped this on the number 42 bus on Tuesday evening. I retrieved it for you. Your work is compelling, and I would be interested in discussing it with you further. Please call me to arrange a time to retrieve your folder." Below was a phone number and a name, Eleanor Vance. Maya stared at the note, utterly bewildered. She checked her portfolio, the side clasp was indeed open, and the manila folder with her private sketches was gone. A hot flush of panic and embarrassment washed over her. Someone had seen her most personal, unpolished work. But who? Eleanor Vance? The name meant nothing to her. She pictured the old woman from the bus. Could it be her? It seemed impossible. An elderly woman, tracking her down from a dropped folder? Her first instinct was suspicion. Was this some kind of scam? But the quality of the stationery, the refined handwriting, it felt genuine. The word, compelling, echoed in her mind. Someone had seen her secret work and not laughed. Someone had called it compelling. Despite her apprehension, a seed of curiosity was planted. After a restless night, she decided to make the call. She did it on her lunch break, hiding in a stairwell at work so her colleagues wouldn't overhear. She rehearsed what she would say, her heart hammering in her chest. A woman answered on the second ring. The voice was unmistakable, soft, crisp, and educated. It was the woman from the bus. Eleanor Vance speaking. "Hello, Mrs. Vance? This is Maya Sharma," Maya began, her voice trembling slightly. "You sent me a note? About a folder I dropped?" "Ah, Miss Sharma. Yes. I'm so glad you called," Eleanor said, her tone warm and calm, instantly putting Maya at ease. "I have your folder here, quite safe. I must confess, I took the liberty of looking through it. I hope you don't mind." "Oh, no, it's fine," Maya stammered. "It's just some doodles, really." "They are much more than doodles, my dear," Eleanor corrected gently. "They are ideas. And very good ones. I was wondering if you might be free to come by my home to pick them up? Perhaps this Saturday afternoon? We could have some tea." Maya was taken aback. An invitation to the home of a complete stranger. Everything in her modern, urban dweller's brain screamed no. But her curiosity, and the undeniable pull of that single word, compelling, was stronger. Yes, she heard herself say. Saturday would be fine. On Saturday, Maya found herself standing on the sidewalk in front of the brownstone, the address clutched in her hand. The house was beautiful, understated, and a little intimidating. Taking a deep breath, she walked up the stone steps and rang the bell. The door was opened by Eleanor Vance herself. She was dressed not in a tweed coat, but in a simple cashmere sweater and tailored trousers. She looked less like a frail old woman and more like the formidable intellectual she was. "Miss Sharma." "Maya. Welcome," she said with a warm smile. "Please, come in." Maya stepped inside, and her jaw nearly dropped. She felt as though she had walked into a museum dedicated to everything she loved. The scent of books, the models, the blueprints framed on the walls, it was a haven. Her eyes were drawn to one in particular, a stunning black and white photograph of a sleek, modernist building that seemed to float above a public plaza. "Vance and Albright's design for the Crestwood Arts Pavilion, 1972, Eleanor said, noticing Maya's gaze. It was one of David's favorites. The name hit Maya like a bolt of lightning. Vance and Albright. She hadn't recognized the name Eleanor Vance on its own, but Vance and Albright was legendary. They were a foundational part of her architectural history textbooks. A firm that had burned brightly and then vanished, spoken of in reverent, almost mythical terms by her professors. She was standing in the home of Eleanor Vance. The Eleanor Vance. Maya turned to her, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. You're Eleanor Vance." Eleanor smiled gently. "I was, a long time ago. Now I'm mostly just a woman who enjoys a quiet cup of tea. Which reminds me," she said, gesturing toward a comfortable sitting area by a large window overlooking a garden. "Please, sit." For the next hour, they talked. Eleanor didn't just ask about Maya's job, she asked about her philosophies. She asked what Maya thought the purpose of a public library was in the digital age. She asked how a building could address social isolation. She asked Maya to defend her thesis on the architecture of belonging. It was the most exhilarating conversation Maya had ever had. Eleanor didn't just listen, she challenged, she probed, she built upon Maya's ideas with insights born from a lifetime of experience. She treated Maya not as a junior employee or a student, but as an intellectual peer. For the first time since graduation, Maya felt seen. Finally, Eleanor retrieved the manila folder from a nearby desk. She handed it to Maya. "I believe this is yours." "Thank you," Maya said, clutching the folder. "Thank you for everything. For finding me, for the tea, for the conversation." "It was my pleasure," Eleanor said, her clear blue eyes holding Maya's. "Your sketches remind me of the reason I became an architect in the first place. There is a great deal of heart in your work, Maya. It's a rare quality." Maya felt a lump form in her throat. I feel so stuck. At my job. I'm not building anything that matters." Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her expression growing more serious. "Talent is a responsibility, my dear. And wasting it is one of life's great tragedies. Which brings me to the real reason I invited you here." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the quiet room. "I didn't just call you here for tea. I have a proposal for you. A project. One that isn't about profit or cost efficiency, but about legacy. About community. About actually building something that matters." Maya stared at her, her heart pounding. The world outside the brownstone walls, the bus, the cubicle, the soul-crushing routine, seemed to fall away. In its place was a single, terrifying, thrilling question mark. Question for Act 2, Eleanor Vance, a figure from the past, recognizes a kindred spirit in Maya. Often, mentorship is about more than just teaching skills, it's about validating a shared vision. Who in your life, past or present, has seen and affirmed your truest potential, and how did that recognition change your perception of yourself? ACT 3, The Oakwood Proposition. Narrator, the air in Eleanor Vance's study seemed to grow still, charged with unspoken potential. Maya sat on the edge of her seat, the manila folder resting forgotten in her lap. A project? A proposal from the Eleanor Vance? It was a concept so far beyond the realm of her daily reality that it felt like a dream. A project? Maya echoed, her voice barely a whisper. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She rose from her chair with a grace that defied her years and walked to a large, antique map cabinet in the corner of the room. With a soft click, she opened one of the wide, flat drawers and pulled out a massive, rolled-up document. It was not a modern blueprint, but an old city planning map, yellowed with age, its lines drawn in faded ink. She spread it across a large oak table that dominated the center of the room. "Come here, Maya." Maya approached the table, her eyes wide. The map was of Crestwood, but it was a version of the city she had never seen before. It was detailed, showing every street, every block, every building footprint. A large section on the city's west side was circled in red pencil. "Do you know the Oakwood district?" Eleanor asked, her finger tracing the red circle. Maya nodded. "I know of it. The 42 bus goes along its eastern edge. It's not in good shape." "Not in good shape," Eleanor repeated, her voice laced with a bitter irony. "That's a polite way of putting it. Today, Oakwood is a place the rest of the city tries to forget. It has the highest poverty rate, the highest unemployment, and the lowest life expectancy in all of Crestwood. The buildings are crumbling, businesses are shuttered, and the only green space is the weeds growing in vacant lots." She looked up from the map, her gaze locking with Maya's. "But it was not always this way. When I was a girl, Oakwood was the heart of this city's working class. It was vibrant. It had a community theater, 3 bakeries, a public market. The houses were small but well kept. People knew their neighbors. They had pride." Eleanor's finger moved to a specific point on the map, a large, empty-looking square near the district center. This was the site of the old textile mill. It employed over 1,000 people from the neighborhood. When it closed in the late 70s, it was a death blow. The jobs left, then the people who could afford to leave left, and then the hope left. The city has made promises for 40 years. Urban renewal plans, enterprise zones, tax incentives, all of it failed, because none of it was ever for the people who actually lived there. It was all about luring outside developers to build things the community didn't need, at prices they couldn't afford. Maya listened, captivated. This wasn't just a history lesson, it was a eulogy. "For 15 years, Eleanor continued, her voice dropping, becoming more personal, I have done nothing. I watched from the sidelines as the city I loved was carved up by firms like the one you work for, Sterling and Sterling. I watched them build glass towers downtown while neighborhoods like Oakwood were left to rot. I told myself my time was over. That I had failed once, and that was enough. She tapped the map again, this time with a newfound force. I was wrong. It is a sin to sit on knowledge and resources while the world suffers. My husband David and I, we created this foundation decades ago. It's been sitting dormant, growing, managed by my advisor. It's now substantial. She finally revealed the true scope of her intention. I want to use that money to bring Oakwood back. Not with a single, grand gesture. Not with another soulless development. But from the ground up. I want to fund a new, non-profit community development corporation. One that will be based in Oakwood, that will hire from Oakwood, and that will work with the residents to determine what they need. A new library. A real grocery store with fresh food. Safe, beautiful, affordable housing. A vocational training center. Green spaces for children to play in. Eleanor turned her full attention to Maya, her blue eyes blazing with a fire Maya had not seen before. This isn't just about building buildings, Maya. It's about rebuilding a community's soul. It requires an architect who understands that. An architect who designs for belonging. She gestured from the map to the manila folder in Maya's hand. It requires the person who drew these sketches. The room fell silent. The weight of the proposal settled on Maya's shoulders. It was immense. Impossible. She wasn't a planner, a community organizer, or the head of a foundation. She was a junior architect who designed parking garages. Me? Maya said, the word catching in her throat. Mrs. Vance, I don't know what to say. It's incredible, but I'm not qualified. I've never managed a project, never dealt with city zoning, never even spoken at a community meeting. I just make sketches. You have the vision, Eleanor stated, as if it were an irrefutable fact. The rest can be learned. I will teach you. I will guide you. I will be your partner. I have the experience, the contacts, the capital. But I no longer have the energy or the years to be on the front lines. I need a proxy. I need a vessel for this vision. I need you. The offer hung in the air, leave your life behind. Your stable, predictable, soul-crushing job. Your salary. Your benefits. Your clear-cut path. In exchange, take on an impossible task with an elderly recluse, in a forgotten neighborhood, with no guarantee of success. I wouldn't be able to pay you what Sterling and Sterling pays you, Eleanor said, her tone softening, acknowledging the practical realities. Not at first. The foundation can provide a modest stipend, enough to live on. But this is not a job you take for the money. You take it for the meaning. Maya's mind was reeling. She thought of her parents, immigrants who had sacrificed everything so their daughter could have a stable, professional career. An architect was a respectable job. Quitting that job to work for a stipend on a project for an old woman would be, in their eyes, an act of insanity. She thought of her student loans, a mountain of debt that her steady paycheck was slowly chipping away at. Then she thought of her cubicle. She pictured the fluorescent lights, the gray fabric walls, the computer screen filled with the sterile lines of another concrete box. She felt the familiar, dull ache of her wasted potential. She looked at Eleanor, whose face was etched with a lifetime of passion and regret. She looked at the map of Oakwood, a place of forgotten dreams. And she looked at her own sketches, the tangible proof of the architect she desperately wanted to be. This was a crossroads. Not just a career choice, but a fundamental choice about who she was and what her life was for. One path was safe, paved, and led to a destination she already knew she didn't want. The other was a steep, unpaved trail leading into an unknown wilderness, with only a map and a guide she had met less than a week ago. The fear was immense. The fear of failure, of disappointing her parents, of financial ruin. But underneath the fear was something else, something she hadn't felt in years, a thrilling, terrifying surge of purpose. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of a great precipice, knowing that the only way forward was to jump. She took a deep breath, the air in the study feeling charged and new. She met Eleanor's expectant gaze, and in her own eyes, a flicker of the old woman's fire was reflected. Okay, Maya said, her voice quiet but firm. I'll do it. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Eleanor Vance's face. It was a smile of relief, of vindication, of profound hope. Good, she said simply. Then our work begins on Monday. Leaving Eleanor's house an hour later felt like stepping into a different world. The city of Crestwood looked the same, but Maya saw it with new eyes. She saw the cracks in the pavement not as decay, but as opportunities for something new to grow. She saw the vacant lots not as empty spaces, but as blank canvases. The number 42 bus pulled up to the stop, and she got on, but this time she didn't take a seat. She stood, holding the pole, looking out at the city that was no longer her cage, but her challenge. The next few days were a whirlwind. On Monday morning, Maya walked into Mr. Henderson's office at Sterling and Sterling. He was on the phone, barking about load-bearing walls. She waited patiently. When he finally hung up, he looked at her, annoyed. "What is it, Sharma? I need those distribution center specs by lunch." "Mr. Henderson," Maya said, her voice steady. "I'm giving you my 2 weeks' notice. I'm resigning." Henderson stared at her, dumbfounded. "Resigning? Where are you going? Did a competitor give you a better offer?" The idea that she might be leaving for any other reason was inconceivable to him. "I'm going to work on a community revitalization project," she said simply. "In the Oakwood district." He scoffed. "Oakwood? What, for some non-profit? That's career suicide, Sharma. There's no money there. No prestige. You're throwing away a promising career." "I guess we have different definitions of promising," Maya replied, a calm smile on her face. She placed her letter of resignation on his desk. For the first time, she felt no fear of him, no intimidation. She felt only a profound sense of liberation. The phone call to her parents was harder. They were, as she had predicted, horrified. "You're quitting your job? For what?" "To be a volunteer," her father's voice boomed over the phone. "We didn't send you to the best school to throw it all away. This is foolishness, Maya." She tried to explain about Eleanor Vance, about the foundation, about the vision for Oakwood. But her words sounded thin and naive against their wall of practicality and fear. "It's what I have to do, Dad," she finished, her voice pleading. "This is why I became an architect. Please, try to understand." They didn't understand. The call ended with a strained, painful silence. That night, Maya cried. She cried from the fear, from the parental disapproval, and from the sheer, overwhelming gravity of the choice she had made. But as she lay in bed, she clutched the memory of the map, of Eleanor's fiery gaze, of the breathtaking possibility of it all. This was her path now. The choice had been made. There was no turning back. She had stepped off the edge. Now, all she could do was learn to fly. Music swells, a mix of trepidation and resolve, then fades. Question for Act 3, Maya makes a life-altering decision, choosing uncertain, meaningful work over a stable but unfulfilling career. This often involves sacrificing security and defying the expectations of loved ones. What is the biggest leap of faith you have ever taken in your life, and what gave you the courage to make it? ACT 4, The Politics of Dust. Narrator, the first few weeks were a blur of intoxicating potential. The Oakwood Revitalization Foundation, as they decided to call it, was officially incorporated. Eleanor, acting through Mr. Abernathy, set up their base of operations not in a sleek downtown office, but in a rented storefront on the main, dilapidated commercial street of Oakwood itself. It was a former shoe repair shop, with dusty windows and peeling paint. The symbolism was intentional. They were here, on the ground, not observing from a tower. Maya and Eleanor spent their days in that dusty storefront, which slowly transformed into a makeshift studio. They brought in folding tables for desks, tacked up the massive city map on one wall, and covered another in corkboard, which soon blossomed with Maya's sketches, demographic data, and photographs of the neighborhood. The initial work was a two-woman whirlwind. Eleanor, the strategist, worked her old networks, making quiet phone calls to retired city planners, ethical lawyers, and academics who owed her favors. She taught Maya the labyrinthine language of zoning codes, grant applications, and municipal bonds. Maya, the visionary, was the feet on the ground. She walked every single street in Oakwood, her sketchbook always in hand. She didn't just look at the buildings, she observed the patterns of life. She noted the foot-worn shortcut through a vacant lot that could become a real path. She saw the corner where old men gathered on milk crates to play chess, a spot that desperately needed a few benches and a shade tree. She talked to people. She introduced herself at the local bodega, the last remaining barber shop, the church that ran a weekly soup kitchen. At first, the residents were skeptical. They had seen people like Maya before, well-intentioned outsiders who came with clipboards and promises, only to disappear when the grant money ran out or the politics got tough. Another one, an old woman muttered as Maya sketched the crumbling facade of the old community theater. They come, they look, they leave. Maya understood their cynicism. It was earned. So she didn't promise anything. She just listened. She hosted community conversations in the storefront, offering free coffee and donuts, and often, only 2 or 3 people would show up. But she listened to them intently. She learned about the lack of a safe place for teenagers to go after school. She heard about the food desert, the fact that the nearest full-service grocery store was a 40-minute bus ride away. She heard about the fear of gentrification, the deep-seated worry that any revitalization would just mean their rents would go up and they would be pushed out. This is the most important part of the design process, Maya, Eleanor told her one evening, as they reviewed the day's notes. You don't build for a community. You build with a community. Their knowledge of this place is more valuable than any textbook. Slowly, painstakingly, a plan began to take shape. It was not a single, monolithic project, but a phased, multi-pronged approach. Phase 1 was small, tangible, and focused on an immediate need: the transformation of a large, trash-strewn vacant lot into a community garden and playground. It was a project chosen specifically because it was achievable, visible, and directly addressed the community's desire for safe, green space. Maya poured her soul into the design. It was beautiful, practical, and incorporated ideas from the residents themselves. There were raised garden beds accessible to seniors, a natural playscape for children built from reclaimed wood, a small pavilion for gatherings, and solar-powered lights for security. With Eleanor's guidance, Maya prepared the proposal for the city's planning commission. It was a masterpiece of a document, her visionary renderings paired with Eleanor's rigorously researched data on property values, crime reduction associated with green spaces, and community health benefits. They felt unstoppable. They had the vision, the funding, the community's tentative support, and a flawless plan. And then they hit a wall. A wall named Councilman Roberts. Councilman Roberts was the political power broker for the district, a man who had held his seat for 2 decades by mastering the art of patronage and backroom deals. He saw the Oakwood Revitalization Foundation not as a partner, but as a threat to his control. He had his own allies in the development world, men who had been waiting for years to get their hands on Oakwood's cheap land for high-rent apartment complexes. A non-profit, community-led initiative was the last thing he wanted. Their proposal went before the Planning Commission. Maya, nervous but passionate, gave the presentation of her life. She spoke of belonging, of safety, of the community's own expressed desires. It was met with polite, non-committal smiles. Then Councilman Roberts's proxy on the commission stood up and began to pick the plan apart. A community garden? It's a noble idea, but fiscally irresponsible. The land is zoned for commercial development. It represents a loss of potential tax revenue for the city, he droned. And this playground, the liability is a nightmare. Furthermore, there is a much more ambitious proposal for this entire sector from a proven developer, Sterling and Sterling. Maya's blood ran cold. Sterling and Sterling. Her old firm. Of course. Roberts was in their pocket. The proposal was tabled. Indefinitely. The defeat was crushing. It was more than a bureaucratic setback, it was a public humiliation. A local news blog, likely fed by Roberts's office, ran a story titled "Rich Recluse and Naive Novice Try to Plant Petunias in a Wasteland." It painted Eleanor as an out-of-touch dilettante and Maya as a doe-eyed idealist, completely unprepared for the realities of urban development. The tentative trust Maya had built in the community evaporated overnight. The cynicism returned, harder than before. "Told you so," the faces on the street seemed to say. The storefront felt empty and silent. The beautiful renderings on the corkboard now seemed like a mockery. Maya was devastated. She had worked for months, poured every ounce of herself into this, and for what? To be dismissed and ridiculed. That evening, in the dusty office, the dam of her frustration finally broke. "It's pointless," she exclaimed, her voice shaking with anger and despair as she paced in front of Eleanor. "We can't win. The system is rigged. Roberts, the developers, my old boss, they own the city. They don't care about the people who live here. They just care about money. We were fools to think we could change anything." Eleanor sat quietly in her chair, watching Maya, her face unreadable. "And what did you expect, Maya? That they would simply roll out a red carpet because your intentions were pure? That the forces that created this decay would welcome the cure?" "I expected a fair shot," Maya retorted. "I expected our plan to be judged on its merits." "Its merits are precisely why they are fighting us," Eleanor said, her voice sharp. "Our plan empowers the community. Their plan empowers them. This has always been the fight. It was the fight that defeated me 30 years ago, and it's the same fight today. Did you think it would be easy? I didn't think it would be impossible." Maya cried, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. "I quit my job for this. I've disappointed my parents. I've poured my entire life into this for the last 6 months, and for nothing. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am just a naive idealist. Maybe you chose the wrong person." The accusation hung in the air. Eleanor's expression hardened for a moment, then softened into something sad and deeply weary. She was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual fiery conviction. "Let me tell you about the Marcus Garvey housing project," she said. Maya stopped pacing, surprised by the sudden shift in topic. "It was my project? My magnum opus, back in 1978. It was going to be the model for the future of public housing. Not high-rise towers, but low-rise, high-density homes with shared courtyards, community centers, on-site daycare, a true neighborhood. I won awards for the design before a single brick was laid. Her eyes had a distant look, seeing a ghost from the past. But to build it, I had to make compromises. I partnered with the city. I trusted politicians who made promises. The budget was cut, then cut again. The contractors they hired used substandard materials. The community liaisons I'd hired were replaced with political cronies. By the time it was built, it was a perversion of my design. The courtyards became magnets for crime, the community centers were never staffed, the roofs leaked. The media, who had once celebrated me, called it Vance's folly. It destroyed people's lives. It destroyed my reputation. And it destroyed my will. She looked directly at Maya, her vulnerability a shocking, powerful thing. I ran away. I hid in my house for decades and told myself the world was corrupt and not worth the fight. You are right to be angry, Maya. But you are wrong to give up. This setback, this is not the end. This is merely the price of admission. The question is, are you willing to pay it? Are you willing to be smarter, tougher, and more relentless than they are? Or will you do what I did, and run? The story, the raw honesty of Eleanor's greatest failure, silenced Maya's anger, replacing it with a profound sense of humility. She wasn't just working for Eleanor, she was carrying the weight of her mentor's second chance. Giving up wouldn't just be her own failure, it would be a betrayal of Eleanor's renewed faith. She sank into the chair opposite Eleanor, the fight drained out of her, replaced by a nascent resolve. Okay, she whispered, wiping her eyes. I'm not going to run. So what do we do now? They won't give us the land. A slow, shrewd smile returned to Eleanor's lips. Then we don't ask for it, she said. If the front door is locked, you find a side window. Councilman Roberts controls the city-owned land. But he doesn't control everything. We're going to pivot. We're going to think smaller. More granular. And we're going to bypass the planning commission entirely. The fire was back in her eyes, and this time, Maya felt its warmth not as pressure, but as a guiding light in the darkness. The despair of the last few days began to recede, replaced by the grim, clear-eyed determination of a fight that was far from over. Question for Act 4, Maya and Eleanor faced a dark night of the soul moment, where their vision collided with a corrupt and cynical system. True purpose is often tested not by the difficulty of the work itself, but by external opposition and the temptation to despair. Think of a time you faced a significant setback or failure. What did you learn from that experience that success could never have taught you? ACT 5, The Architecture of Belonging. Narrator, defeat, Eleanor Vance knew, was a more potent teacher than victory. The failed proposal was not an end, but a crucible. It burned away their naivete, leaving behind a core of hardened, strategic resolve. The new mantra in the dusty storefront became bypass and build. If the city wouldn't give them a large vacant lot, they would find 100 small spaces the city had forgotten. Their new strategy was grassroots, surgical, and quietly defiant. Eleanor, through the foundation, allocated a portion of the funds for microgrants. Maya, armed with this new tool, went back into the community, but this time she wasn't asking for opinions, she was offering partnerships. Her first target was the corner where the old men played chess on milk crates. It was a tiny, triangular patch of dirt owned by an absentee landlord who hadn't paid taxes in a decade. Through a pro bono lawyer Eleanor had contacted, the foundation took possession of the derelict property for back taxes, a perfectly legal maneuver that completely bypassed Councilman Roberts's influence. They didn't arrive with bulldozers. Maya arrived with 3 sturdy benches, a new chessboard inlaid in a concrete table, and a young, hardy oak tree. She worked with the men themselves to install everything. They dug the hole for the tree, they bolted the benches to the ground. It was their corner. At the end of the day, the space was transformed. It was a tiny change, a single grace note in a symphony of urban decay, but it was real. And the people of Oakwood noticed. Next, Maya approached the pastor of the church that ran the soup kitchen. Their building had a flat, sun-drenched roof that was in disrepair. Maya showed the pastor sketches not of a new roof, but of a rooftop garden. Using a microgrant from the foundation, they hired a local, unemployed contractor from the neighborhood to repair and reinforce the roof. Then, with volunteers from the congregation, they installed a series of raised beds. They planted tomatoes, lettuce, kale, and herbs. The food grown on the roof went directly into the meals served by the soup kitchen below. It addressed the food dessert problem one rooftop at a time. Each project was small, but they began to add up. They worked with a local artist to paint a vibrant mural on the side of the bodega, covering a wall of graffiti. They funded a tool library out of an old garage, where residents could borrow tools for home repairs. They didn't just build things, they invested in the community's own capacity to build for itself. Maya was no longer seen as an outsider with a clipboard. She was Maya, the woman who had helped Mr. Rodriguez fix his fence, the one who organized the Saturday morning cleanup that cleared the overgrown alley behind the church. Councilman Roberts and his developer allies were flummoxed. These projects were too small to oppose politically. What politician would vote against a community garden or a mural? Yet, their cumulative effect was undeniable. A new sense of pride and agency was taking root in Oakwood. The foundation wasn't just revitalizing the neighborhood, it was inoculating it against the kind of predatory development Roberts favored. An empowered, organized community was much harder to displace. The turning point came a year after their initial defeat. The old, abandoned community theater, the one whose crumbling facade Maya had sketched on one of her first days, went up for auction. It was a beautiful, historic building, but so dilapidated that no commercial developer would touch it without massive city subsidies, subsidies Roberts was not inclined to grant to anyone but his friends. Eleanor and Maya saw their chance. This was their flagship project, the heart of the community that Eleanor remembered. The foundation, using a significant portion of its capital, bought the building outright. The renovation of the Oakwood Community Arts Center became the focal point of all their efforts. Maya's design was a masterpiece of adaptive reuse. She honored the building's historic character while infusing it with modern functionality. It would have a main stage for performances, but also smaller classrooms for art and music lessons, a digital media lab for teenagers, a coffee shop that would provide jobs, and a gallery space for local artists. The construction wasn't done by an outside firm. They hired and trained a crew of local men and women, teaching them valuable skills in carpentry, masonry, and electrical work. The entire community felt a sense of ownership over the project. People would stop by with coffee for the crew, or simply to watch the progress as the broken windows were replaced and the grand marquee was restored to its former glory. The grand reopening of the Oakwood Community Arts Center, 2 years after Maya first set foot in the neighborhood, was a major city event. The mayor attended. The local news, which had once mocked them, was there in force, now praising the innovative, grassroots model of urban renewal. Even Councilman Roberts was there, forced to smile for the cameras and pretend this had been his idea all along. But the real guests of honor were the residents of Oakwood. The theater was packed. The first performance was a variety show featuring local talent, a children's choir, a young spoken-word poet, the old men from the corner performing a traditional song. Maya stood in the back of the theater, watching the joy on the faces in the audience. She saw the pastor from the church, the owner of the bodega, the construction crew she had worked alongside, all beaming with pride. Eleanor Vance sat in the front row, a quiet, triumphant smile on her face. Her blue eyes, though perhaps a little dimmer with age, shone with a light that Maya had never seen before. Later that evening, Maya found Eleanor sitting on a bench in the newly christened Founders Plaza, outside the theater. The air was cool, and the sounds of laughter and music spilled out from the open doors. David would have loved this, Eleanor said softly, looking at the restored building. He always said the best buildings were the ones that held a community's stories. We did it, Eleanor, Maya said, sitting beside her. The words felt wonderfully, impossibly true. No, my dear, Eleanor corrected gently. You did it. I just opened the door. You were the one brave enough to walk through it. She turned to Maya, her expression serious. The foundation is yours now. To run, to lead. I've taught you everything I know about buildings and politics. The rest, the heart, you had from the very beginning. In that moment, looking at the transformed street, at the vibrant life pouring from the theater she had brought back from the dead, Maya finally understood. Her destiny was never just about being an architect. That was only the medium. Her true destiny, the path that had been laid out for her from the moment she stood up on that bus, was to be a builder of a different kind. A builder of community. A practitioner of the architecture of belonging. The simple act of giving up her seat had not led her to a better job or a more exciting career. It had led her back to the very core of herself. It had connected her to a forgotten history, a mentor who saw her true potential, and a community that needed her vision. It had allowed her to take the ideals she once confined to a secret sketchbook and build them into the living, breathing heart of a neighborhood. Years passed. The Oakwood Revitalization Foundation, under Maya's leadership, became a national model for community-led development. The district continued to blossom, not by displacing its residents, but by empowering them. Maya never became Starchitect famous. Her name wasn't on the cover of glossy magazines. But if you walked the streets of Oakwood, her legacy was everywhere, in the laughter of children on the playground, in the fresh vegetables sold at the co-op market, in the posters for the new play at the Art Center, in the quiet dignity of the old men playing chess under their oak tree. One afternoon, Maya, now in her late 30s, was sitting on that very same bench, reviewing plans for a new affordable housing project. A crowded city bus hissed to a stop nearby. A young man, looking exhausted and weighed down by a heavy backpack, got off. He saw Maya, deeply engrossed in her work, and then looked at the vibrant, thriving community around him. He didn't know who she was, or the story of how this place had been reborn. To him, it was just a nice neighborhood. A place where it felt good to be. And in that, Maya Sharma found the quiet, profound fulfillment of her true destiny. She had not just built buildings. She had built a place where a tired young man could get off a bus and feel, even for a moment, that he belonged. Question for Act 5, Maya's destiny was not a singular, grand achievement, but the ongoing, living work of building a community. This suggests that true purpose is often a process, not a destination. Looking at your own life and aspirations, are you chasing a final destination, or are you cultivating a meaningful process? Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next.